LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Matt Stadler.
This is what Rod Liddle said in The Spectator. I repeat it only because it has been published, and if we don't confront it, then this sort of thing is more likely to appear in national publications in the future. This is Rod Liddle in The Spectator. He said it was principally the student vote that won Canterbury for the sobbing and oppressed Rosie #MeToo Duffield. This is the Labour MP, by the way, who complained in Parliament recently, very movingly, about domestic abuse in the form of control, I think. He goes on, Rod Liddle, to say, please don't let that happen again. My own choice of election, he said, not being enough to attack someone who's been the victim of domestic abuse. Please don't let that happen again, he said. And I should technically say, I suppose, alleged domestic abuse. My own choice of election date would be a day when universities are closed, so attacking students, and Muslims are forbidden to do anything on pain of hell or something. There must be at least one day like that in the Muslim calendar, surely. That would deliver at least 40 seats to the Tories, I reckon. What a horrible thing to say about a group of people who, yes, are linked together by their religion, but also let's confront reality, often by a racial or ethnic identity. I mean, it is just basically racism. It's disgusting and it's revolting. And it's suggesting that Muslims will only vote in one way, but also just being so dismissive tonally towards that group of people. Unbelievable that should be published in The Spectator. Fraser Nelson is the editor of The Spectator. I've called him out on Twitter. I've said, does Fraser Nelson think it's witty or somehow a defence of free speech to allow this blatant racism from Rod Liddle to find a home in the pages of The Spectator? Time for my old friend Andrew Neil, whom I used to edit at the BBC, chairman of The Spectator, to have a word or be tarred by the same brush. I just think it's extraordinary, don't you? 0345 6060 973. Abbas, we haven't had Abbas on the show for a very long time. Abbas, where on earth have you been, man?
Just very busy at work.
That's no excuse, Abbas. No excuse whatsoever.
But I do
My
listen
nights
to
have been
you,
longer without you.
Well, don't tell the missus that. She might get worried.
I certainly won't. I don't have a missus anymore, but anyway, carry on.
Okay. No, I mean, I'm deeply insulted, really, with what Liddle actually said. I mean, I think it's a real disgrace. And I think if he said it about certain other communities or religions, there would have been a huge backlash and it would have been completely unacceptable.
There was a backlash on Twitter, but I think insufficient. I just don't think there's been enough of a fuss made about this. I'm staggered that a mainstream publication like The Spectator will allow that sort of racist filth in there.
And then the worrying thing, of course, is that the fact that it can get into print, can be aired. This is just more fodder for people who already fester hatred, already have a predisposition to hate Muslims because they think we're just one big homogenized group, all thinking the same, doing the same. And it's the same sort of tactics throughout history that we've seen, that were unfortunately, very successful at committing some of the most heinous acts against, for example, the Jewish community in Nazi, Germany. And we're seeing similar sort of tactics being used by, making a whole community, as I say, one homogenized group, all, against our community, which is, the wider public or whatever. And I think it's very, very damaging, and it's just very hateful. And when I was young, I used to think to myself, people will get more educated, they'll get a little bit more sophisticated, and hopefully they'll be able to be a little bit more reflective and perhaps less hateful, less racist. But it appears in many ways, we seem to be going back to where the 60s and the 70s were, where these things were said openly and were quite accepted. And we just seem to be going through the whole cycle all over again. It's just very, very worrying, to be honest.
I mean, in pockets, I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is widespread, but when you have someone who is Prime Minister and running to be Prime Minister again, who says in an article last year that Muslim women wearing the hijab look like pillar boxes, I mean, it sets such an incredibly corrosive example.
No, of course it does. And if you dehumanise people, we know exactly where that leads to. It happened to the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. It happened to many other communities, and as a consequence, people are empowered and they feel like they have to. They're activated. They feel like they have to do something. So when they see a Muslim woman walking down the street, and if she's on her own, they're more likely to pull the hijab off her head or punch her in the face, which is what is happening actually on the streets, because we have record numbers of people reporting things. Hate crimes and what have you. And so these things are working. They are dividing people. And it's a shame that people are not perhaps intelligent enough to realise that, people are people, ultimately.
Rod Liddle,
bad.
Rod Liddle, I don't know whether you know this, was the editor of the Today programme on BBC Radio 4.
And that's worrying, isn't it, really? Because a person of that much power and influence has such a deep-rooted, vile, venomous hatred for a people. And clearly, many of these people, I think, they really do have a disease in their hearts and in their souls, and they can't see beyond that. And it's a shame, but I think hatred.
But is the London of Claire in Clapham, who was so offensive earlier, is that really our London, Abbas? Is it a London that you recognise? It's not a London that I recognise.
Look, I really do believe, I'm a very positive person, and I do believe that most people are decent and they are good. And we are very lucky to actually live in London compared to most, if not all, cities around the world. We're a very inclusive society. We are a very, I think, fair society. Yes, of course, there is racism, and of course, at times it does raise its ugly head. And this is just one other incident, another incident where it has. We've got, unfortunately, people who do seem to have a great following, like Katie Hopkins, like this chap here, and probably so many others. And they're using that platform and social media. They're abusing it, in fact, in a way to create more hatred and more division. And I think, I'm not saying that we should censor everybody or that we should stop anybody from saying anything. I do believe, I'm an advocate for freedom of speech, but where we can clearly see where something is, going to cause harm to society, harm to our fabric of unity, to one another, and possibly, raise the ugly head of far-right racism and attacks against a minority, then I think there has to be some accountability. I think we can't just have a free-for-all, because when you have a free-for-all, very nasty things actually end up happening in the future.
Abbas, really good to have you back. I hope you've been listening this whole time you haven't been calling.
I've been avidly listening to you.
And how do you think the show is progressing without you, Abbas?
It's coping just fine. You're a very professional, a very good presenter. So I think Abbas or no Abbas, the show will go on. Don't worry about that.
Abbas, we need you. Have a wonderful morning. Abbas in Redbridge, thank you. 0345 6060